Welcome back to our Journalists Roundtable. Let's get straight to the panel. So you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that there is a big difference in the way China views itself and the way the West views China. Let's take, for instance, the National People's Congress, China's top legislature. Now, some Western media label it as a rubber stamp parliament. And as a Chinese journalist, how do you define it? How do you see its role?
Well, I think the West should stop looking at China through their own lenses. China's political institution has not been like the West. It is not like the West. It will probably never be like the West. But of course, China is learning and adapting. For example, the NPC, the National People's Congress, the top legislature in this country. It may look like a rubber stamp in the eyes of many Westerners, but it actually serves a purpose of representative democracy. These 2,000 NPC deputies, they are from wide spectrum of social strata. They are the best and the brightest the nation can offer. And they have the drive to advise and critique the government. But they just don't do it the way like Western party politics, which in the eyes of many Chinese are a zero-sum game. One party success likes in the demise of the other. Here they call it consensual politics. Everybody provide a bit of their ideas, and then the ruling party, in this case, the Chinese Communist Party, form a prototype guideline for this nation, and then at an annual meeting, 2,000 people representing 1.3 billion people analyzed and expanded the guideline, and they vote. And the reason why it always passed is probably because all the opposing ideas, conflicting thoughts have been expressed and adopted in the drafting process. And people here tend to agree on something, if that is something smart and workable. So when the guidelines is decided on, it is a go. And the Chinese still think this is good governance, at least for now.
Duncan, is it important for the international community to better understand the things that Zhou Yue has just been talking about there, how the legislative system works and what it's about?
Well, I think there are certainly rooms for misunderstanding. I mean, when you see sort of the votes at the end, for example, they tend to be remarkably high, and that I think sort of leads to a lot of this accusation that it's a rubber stamp body. I don't think the NPC has ever actually voted down a motion in its history. But of course, the reality is, as Zhou Yue points out, that actually a lot of the debate happens off the floor, and that by the time things actually come to a vote, indeed actually by the time that the NPC itself is held, most of the debate has already happened. One should not forget that, for example, in the formation of the 5-year plan, there is a very, very long process that happens at the provincial and the city level, with everyone feeding into this national plan over a space of months, if not even longer than that, into a year. So by the time you get to the NPC, you get an end result. But in order to understand what's happening at the NPC, you need to kind of take into account this whole process of what's happened beforehand. So the NPC serves as a focus for the outcome, but actually it's the process that's important.
Afshin, when you look at coverage of the two sessions here in the United States, of course the United States and China differ in many, many respects, differ in their political systems. Was coverage enough? Was it fair?
I think you did see big pieces in the sort of the major print dailies. I think television media is totally consumed with the election season. Maybe if Donald Trump had gone to the National People's Congress, they would have covered it. But television media totally missed the story. But I think in the print dailies you did see that kind of coverage of what was going on there. But I think what we miss here in the U.S. in terms of the coverage is we miss how China links to the American economy and how China links to the global economy. Because if there's really 4 things that matter to the global economy. It's the U.S. economy, it's the Eurozone, it's oil prices, and China. And the great China demand engine has been feeding into a lot of these other things. It's been feeding into the Eurozone, feeding into emerging markets, feeding into oil prices for so many years. And I think that's the piece that we often miss in the coverage is the importance of China to the global economy, the importance of China to exporters here in the U.S., and the importance of China to the Eurozone's recovery as well.
Pepe, what does China need to do to improve, to get us to better understand how it makes policy and how it functions?
It's a question of soft power, and everything gets lost in translation, linguistic, and in cultural translation as well. As was previously explained very well, by the way, the decision-making process in China is way more sophisticated than any well-informed Western may get, unless he has lived in China or he's very closely connected with China. So what they will need is a sort of a soft power offensive. For instance, internally, they had that very, very funny video selling the 4 comprehensives. There was also an English version. The English version in the US, at least, in Europe, you know, nobody even paid attention to it. In the US, it was derided as a cartoon. No, it was not a cartoon. It was a very clever instance of soft power trying to explain a very complicated process. So China should invest more in these I would say fast-track soft power operations, not only in the US, but across Europe as well. For instance, the coverage of the 2 sessions in continental Europe was negligible, and sometimes practically non-existent. They were consumed by the Eurozone crisis, by Syria, by the Trump against Hillary, you name it. So it's up to Chinese propaganda department to deal with the rest of the world, maybe, but that's what's going to happen. A soft power operation all over the world, selling how China thinks and how China decides.
Okay, I want to get to the final topic, and that is the biggest takeaway from these 2 sessions. I've only got 2 minutes, so you guys have 30 seconds each. Afshin, what's the biggest takeaway?
The biggest takeaway is they got through this and they showed a sense of competence that we're in control of the economy again. Because I think the biggest storyline over the past year has been this fear that institutional investors have that China has lost the plot, that they no longer have that ability to handle their economy. And I think they walked away from this with moving one step forward in the terms of competence in handling their own economy.
Okay, Pepe?
The way I see it, I've been covering the New Silk Roads practically from the beginning. Everything leads towards the New Silk Roads. That's the Chinese major foreign policy initiative, which happens to be the #1 global vision project for the 21st century. And there is no plan B. There's nobody else is selling a vision for the future. The Europeans, the Americans, many developing nations, even the BRICS. The BRICS is an evolving mechanism.
Right.
China is selling to the rest of the world inclusion and Eurasia as an organic whole. When President Putin first talked about Lisbon to Vladivostok, now it's Duisburg and Rotterdam to Shanghai. So this is huge, and they need to try to sell this with a soft power offensive all over the world, because there's no competition.
Okay, Duncan, the biggest takeaway for you?
The biggest takeaway for me is, how do you rationalize the excess supply that they're talking about while you're simultaneously keeping fiscal policy and credit policy loose to hit that 6.5% growth target? Looks like a very difficult task to me.
Zhou Yue, you get the final word. The biggest takeaway from these 2 sessions?
Well, here in China, politics is actually a 2-way traffic, top-down and bottom-up. Well, China's been doing well in top-down. Chinese leaders are usually much more experienced and tested than many Western counterparts when they came to the top positions. And the Chinese government is probably one of the most efficient in terms of execution of its policies from the top. But China needs to do better bottom-up. The annual sessions is actually the institution to solicit ideas and criticism from the bottom, from the grassroots. It is a time when the Chinese government have full exposure to the public, both in terms of policy and politics. Usually the government officials are not so comfortable talking to the peers, to the press. But during the annual 2 sessions, they are more than willing to talk, because they will be held accountable for the policies and talks they made. And the Premier himself demanded his ministers to do more communication to the public and the world.
Right.
And also more and more government agencies are putting their work online to be transparent. So all these, I think it is a learning curve. China wants to do more reform piecemeal, incrementally, but it shows the momentum from bottom up.
Okay.
This is my biggest takeaway.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us.